Yeah, so Dr. Yanti is still not with us, but she conveyed her question through the chat. And so the question of Dr. is, what kind of challenges did you meet at the very beginning of the revitalization program, and how did you deal with the challenges?
So
that's a tough one.
That is a tough one, and I'm not the only person involved in the revitalization of Maori here, and there's many other people, and particularly Maori people, and that's the most important thing. I'm a bit of an outsider, really, because I'm not Maori myself. So the biggest challenges, I think there have been quite a few fights along the way. There was a 1970s, that's going back a long way, and nothing much came of that. So I focused, because it was only a brief presentation, on some of the highlights, but people have been campaigning for work to be done on the language. And way back then, it really didn't seem that anything was ever going to be done, or things that might be done to be effective. So it wasn't really until the kohanga reo took off. And I think that was the thing. And I mentioned how it spread right around the country, and people got really inspired, and it brought the Maori community together and almost as one. And it was, you know, it really did give people a sense of hope. But it's really has only been it's been a hard thing. Even some of the tribal groups, I mentioned the 1,000 Homes initiative that the local tribe here have been running for nearly 25 years. If you speak to some of those people involved, they'll say it's really hard to get their tribal members interested in the language. People have other things they prioritize for their time. So people do put in a lot of effort, and they sometimes get quite discouraged. But at the moment, all this hard work seems to be paying off, and the country is really making quite a big move in a widespread way to really value the language. And so all I can say is that you might get discouraged along the way, and that is quite normal, but you've really got to look at the small things that happen that are positive. So even though you might have lofty goals, which is always very good to have really high level goals, it is really important to focus on what you can do, and do what you can do, and get people around you who are willing to support and do things. So that would be my only advice, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much. Unfortunately, Dr. Yanti is not here. And what about Dr. Nazaruddin? Is he back now, or is he still out of Zoom? Okay, out of Zoom. Well, actually, before Sulastri, there is Atindra. Are you here? Atindra raised her hand a while ago. Ada yang bernama Atindra? Oke, tidak ada. Kalau begitu, silakan Bu Sulastri. Silakan. Sulastri.
Bu Sulastri, dipersilakan yang angkat tangan tadi. Oh, okay. Diganti saja ke Mbak ini Luh Ani Yani.
Oke, silakan.
Dari Sekil.
Silakan langsung saja.
Selamat pagi, Prof. Janet, Prof. Uli. Thank you very much for the opportunity. So thank you, Prof. Janet, a very inspiring presentation. I learned a lot from you. So my question is that I wanted to know about the language attitude of the Maori people. So how is the practice of the Maori language, for example, compared to English for Maori people? In Indonesia, for example, Prof. Janet, people tend to consider Indonesian language or foreign language such as English as a more important language or a better language. And they have a more economic value to be mastered than a local language, for example. Yeah, so how can you comment on that and how to address this
Bahasa,
negative language attitude
Kementerian
issue
Pendidikan
when
Kebudayaan
we are talking about a language revitalization program? Thank you.
Yes, that's a really hard question on one level. So in New Zealand, we do survey both Maori and non-Maori people about their attitudes to the Maori language, and the attitudes are very positive, and Maori people always have more positive attitudes than non-Maori people, but our non-Maori population also has high level of positive attitudes. The only trouble is attitudes don't always translate into action. Good attitudes, that's really good. We don't actually survey people about attitude to English, but we also have people, when I started learning, why are you learning that language? It's going to be no use to you. Well, in fact, it's been very useful and it's provided me with a job, as it turns out. So, but that's the attitudes I think you're talking about, that people don't see a value, and people say, why don't you learn German or French, because those languages are going to be more useful. Well, it's turned out that that's not been the case either, but it is partly to do with that prestige, and often languages that have written forms of the language and books and other things are given more prestige in people's minds, and they believe their own languages aren't as valuable. It's really hard to counter those attitudes because you can't do it just by telling people that your language is just as good, even though it is. I suppose you can tell them that all day, and they probably won't really believe it. So it's partly in those actions, and that's why I was very heartened to hear about the work done to use the local languages in the schools that we heard about earlier, because I think that's one way that people can sort of see, oh, well, our language must be okay if they think it's a good thing to have and, do some activities in the school environment. So it's only going to be a lot of little things like that, I think, help people to understand that, of course, their language is important. And one of the things that we're finding out worldwide when research has been done is that if people maintain their languages, because it's not just their language, but because their culture is tied up with the language too, that in fact people have much better outcomes in terms of their health and well-being if they maintain their language and culture. So there's a lot of evidence to show that. And we know that people get dislocated, don't feel good about themselves, don't feel good about their culture or language, that tends to have actually negative to support all these languages. I find it quite overwhelming to try and think how many languages you've got there and all the work that needs doing. So I'm sure, it is really hard. So don't have for how to change people's attitudes, but just to say, yes, it is really important and it is really hard.
Indeed. So thank you for your comment.
Thank you. So I'm trying again.
Recording
So
in
he's
progress.
from the province where Saiful is located as the director of the language center. So Octo's question is, first, what is the role of the larger community in the effort to revitalize Maori? And the second question is, what factors were there that caused Maori to be on the brink of extinction? So these are the two questions.
Sorry, I forgot to write them down. What was the first one again, Uli? It was about the...
The first question is a very general question, apparently. It's just, what was the role of the larger community in the
right.
effort
Yeah.
to revitalize Maori?
I guess I've got two answers about the larger community, and I'd go back to Joshua Fishman, who says that about the importance of the local people, is that actually you can do a lot of work on your own language without having permission or support from the wider community, and that's really important. And like I said before, you'll only succeed if you have the local people on board. So people in their communities can do a lot, set up their own language nests, try and have activities where the language is used and so on. But that said, it does get to a stage where you do want the support of the wider community. And we, as I've said before, are quite lucky in New Zealand, and I think we're almost unique worldwide in having only one Indigenous language, so that when it came to getting government support and money, we did manage to do that, and without too much difficulty from the wider community. So I think it's things like when making the Maori language an official language, which gave it a higher status, which made it perhaps amongst other members of the community say, oh, okay, so the Maori language. And like I said, most New Zealanders, if they travel overseas, if they're asked to do anything or, that's going to show that they're from New Zealand, it will often involve the Maori language. They might sing a well-known Maori song or attempt to do a haka in Maori. So the language is actually quite an important emblem and symbol for the whole country. Nowadays, when we sing our national anthem, we sing the first verse in Maori and then in English. So every school child in New Zealand knows how to sing the national anthem in Maori. So it's become quite an important symbol of the country as a whole. So, we are quite lucky in that sense. But in terms of, we do have a lot of wider community support. In terms of what the language to the brink, it was the effects of colonisation, which have a huge effect on Indigenous peoples. And we know all sorts of ways, but through the breaking down of community and culture, and through partly what the question before about attitudes, when people start believing that the language is more important, it will get them jobs, and that their culture and language is different. When people start believing those sorts of things, then they start moving towards speaking the other language and not passing it on to their home language on their children. And it's the really difficult thing. And that's what brought the Maori language to the brink. I mentioned also urbanisation. Between 1945 and 1975, the Maori population, in 1945, 25% of the Maori population lived in urban areas, 30 years later, 75% of them lived in urban areas. And once they move out of the rural areas where they have their community around them, move to large centres, and they're living in different houses all over the place, then they lose that those social bonds that are so important for maintaining both language and culture.
Yeah.
So that's what brought us to the brink, and I'm sure it's the same with a lot of the languages that you're representing here today.
Thank you very much, Jeanette. I still have two questions, two people who want to ask questions through the chat. And I think, Bahasa, I think we should then limit it. Okay, well, now there are three questions. Okay, so three questions, but those should really be the final questions. So one question is from Nana Raihana, and that is a very interesting question. She asks, I think Nana is a she, I think. So her question is, okay, the Maori language is important for identity, but besides for the issue of identity, what are non-speakers of Maori missing out? So where do they miss out? Where are they not as Maori as the other Maoris who can speak the language?
Yeah, that's a really good question, isn't it? In one of the early surveys in the mid-90s, there was a question that was never repeated. And the question was, do you have to speak Maori to be a real Maori? It's not a very well-worded question. And they found that most Maori who were surveyed with that question said, no, you don't have to be able to speak Maori to be a real Maori. Now that was asked a long time ago, and it might be different if it was asked today, but it taps into the idea that the main aspect of Maori identity is actually genealogy. So you are Maori if you are descended from a Maori person. It's a legal definition in New Zealand, and so that genealogical relationship is really important. And so for Maori people, those links are incredibly important. And they didn't want to say, well, my auntie who can't speak Maori, she isn't a Maori. No, I can't say that she is. So we have a particular aspect of how Maori identity is defined in New Zealand, which is really important. But so yes, I think what's starting to happen in New Zealand is that a lot of Maori who don't speak Maori, increasing numbers, are wanting now to learn because they see that they are missing out. There's so many things happening in the wider Maori world to which language is the key. I think one person in the chat was asking, well, is there an annual Maori festival? And there kind of is. Every 2 years they have a big festival called Matatini, which is a Maori performing arts festival. And they have teams from all around New Zealand and Australia actually who compete. And this is a really important festival in Maori circles. And when I've attended these festivals, what we are increasingly seeing is that people are speaking Maori to each other as they wander around the festival and talk, interact. So it's becoming more and more for people, Maori people who can't speak Maori are now seeing that, gee, I really do need to start learning this language if I'm going to be able to participate fully. So, yeah, it's not just identity. I think we're starting to get to the stage where people have that fear of missing out. And that's a really hard stage to get to. So that really incentivizes people who aren't speakers to try and start learning.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jeanette. I hope that answered the question. And now the following question is from a person who wants to start learning from you right away. And he is asking, what book can I read? Is there a book, you know, which is the most important publication on Maori language revitalization?
Right. Yeah, I think I saw that question in the chat, but it said what literary work, and I wasn't quite sure what the literary meant. So you mean in terms of language revitalization? I hate to promote myself, but I do have a chapter in a recent book which gives an overview of the whole situation with Maori. So that's one thing.Maybe I could put that in the chat. I mean, obviously there are books about Maori, grammars, and so on, but this is more about the revitalization itself. I'm just putting that in the chat, I think.
Yep, I see it.
That's a chapter I wrote that kind of gives a good overview of many of the things I've talked about today, but perhaps in a bit more detail, some of them.
When we purchase it, will you sign it?
Yeah, sure.
Through Zoom, of course.
I'm going to put another website in the chat too, if I can find it, which has got good information as well. See if I can find it. Yeah. Written by a colleague of mine in Auckland. So he's got a the website I've just put in has got a lot of links to publications and information about the Maori language.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And now we are, well, okay. So I just wanted to announce that this will be the final question. But then I got a chat where there is the final question. So we have two more. Okay. So the next question is Bahasa, from the province of Gorontalo. The Kantor Bahasa is the local language center. And Gorontalo is in North Sulawesi. So it says, thank you for your insightful sharing. And I would like to know how the government of the New Zealand government supports your work in reviving Maori.
Like I said, thank you for that. Like I said, I'm not the only person by any means working in Maori. So, I do a lot of work in other field research as well. In fact, more funding is available for people of Maori descent who want funding to do any sort of work that is going to revive the language within their families and homes. So there's the funding that I mentioned through the government and through tribal groups that people can apply for. So they often have people can apply for to have a Maori, to have a get together of their family, focusing on the language, or to produce a book in Maori, or other things like that, other resources as well. So there's a lot of funding from small level for individuals through to groups, and right through at the tribal level as well, for larger initiatives that are more widespread as well. A lot of the tribes run wānanga reo, or language wānanga, so where people go for a week or 2 or 3 days, often with their whole families, and they will speak Maori for the whole week and have language learning activities both for themselves as parents and their children. So a lot of tribes are putting money into those sorts of things as well. So quite a wide range of initiatives, from the more personal right through to things that are going to be important. So it makes it sound like there's a limitless supply of money, which there isn't, but there is certainly a good level of funding for people who are doing really good things to get the language spoken by more people.
Thank you. And so now the final question, which is a very, very difficult question, and it is from Yanti Riswara, and Yanti is the chair of the local language center of the province of Bengkulu. Bengkulu is in the southern tip of Sumatra, and to the west of Sumatra there's an island chain, and the southernmost island, it's a relatively small island. That island is called Engano. Now, I know that the language of Engano was documented by Professor Kela, who was a professor in the department where I studied Indonesian in Hamburg. And so I know a little bit about Engano, and I thought that Engano already was extinct, but apparently there are still some speakers. And so Yanti has the problem. They are about to create an orthography for the language, and they are struggling with certain sounds and how to represent those sounds. And those are nasal sounds. Well, since, you know, your background is linguistic, I think you can actually advise her to some extent, at least.
Yes, I saw that question in the chat. It is a very tricky question. I guess getting a linguist involved would be useful in terms of whether those nasal sounds do distinguish phonemic differences. So whether they're sounds that need to be represented, it sounds like. In terms of coming up with an orthography that works, that's very difficult too. A lot of the field communities in other parts of the world, like Vanuatu, they've worked to get orthographies for languages. They often work as linguists with the community, and they do a lot of analysis.
Recording in progress.
As to what, how these different sounds might be represented. So I think that's the best advice I can give, is if they can get the services of a linguist who can give them a bit of help and give them some suggestions, and then work it out themselves. say that it's important to have the community involved, because then if the orthography you come up with is more likely to be accepted if people have worked on it and had input into it themselves, but with a bit of technical help. That would be my best advice.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jeanette. I'm looking at the clock, and it's 5:30 in the afternoon here. So I think it's almost lunchtime in Indonesia. So I think I should now return the microphone to Saiful, closing remarks. But before, I would like to say thank you very much. We really appreciate that you took your time and to be with us and answer so many questions. And the fact that so many questions were raised shows us that, you know, there are a lot of people who are concerned the local languages in Indonesia. And of course, we have a completely other situation